One of the well-known haunted places in Victoria is the Cherrybank Hotel. And the whole place, the restaurant, the bar, and the hotel are all very, very haunted. One of the rooms seems to be particularly haunted, just a small room. And it was in that room that an elderly couple had checked in, and during the evening, his wife woke up. She heard some noise. It sounded like scuffling sound. Something was moving in the room. She checked. Her husband was sound asleep. It wasn't him, but there just seemed to be something in the room. She knew that the door was locked and didn't give it much thought. She finally went back to sleep. When they woke up, the couple were quite alarmed to discover that the bathroom door was off its hinges. And it wasn't just off as if it had fallen off. It had actually physically been lifted up and moved several feet, pins and all, and was propped up against the bedroom wall. Lady knew that her husband was not capable of doing this. He hadn't done it. And the door to the outside hallway was still securely locked. She'd heard something in the night. What had it been? No one could explain why. And it's only happened that once. But that room is also the scene of other hauntings as well. And it's become quite well known as a place where people go if they're looking for a haunted experience. It's the Cherrybank Hotel. It was built as a house, just on the edge of downtown, only 3 blocks from the inner harbor, back in the late 1890s. And at some point during its career, it became a small hotel. In the corridor, just at the top of the stairway, people have seen the ghost of a small girl. She seems to wander along the corridor. Some people have heard her talking, but she seems to vanish. She doesn't seem to cause any problems, but people assume that it's one of the children from the household when the family lived there in the 1890s and early 1900s.
I'm Barbara Philby. I'm the manager of the Cherrybank Hotel. I've worked here for approximately 20 years. One of the things that happened, people saying that they saw someone in the night walking down the hallways, feeling like there was a presence in their room, one of the rooms being room number 4. I do know quite a few of the stories that I've heard from staff, customers, previous staff, present staff.
The first hauntings were probably noted shortly after Miss Lynn Hamber, one of the permanent residents of the Cherrybank Hotel, died in the early 1960s. She was from a very prominent family and had lived there for a number of years. When she died, her room was converted into a banquet room. They call it the Flapper Room. It's on the main floor of the hotel. And little things began to happen at first that made people wonder if perhaps Miss Hamber really was a permanent guest for all time.
My name's Kevin Fry, and I've been the musical director at the Cherrybank since 1989. I was this lady that lived in the Flapper Room back when it used to be a private suite. And she lived there for years and years and years. And she died, and we think that her spirit is what is actually causing the Flapper Room to get rearranged. There was a bus girl who was working here a few years ago, and she was setting up the dining room across the hall for a party. And we have a way of setting up the silverware that goes just thus and so on the places. And she was new, inexperienced, and she hadn't set it up the same way. So she came out of the room and went back into the room and looked, and it had all been changed. So she changed it back the way she thought it should be. Came around, went back into the room. About 2 minutes later, the whole room had been reset again. Well, that girl mailed her uniform back to us, and we haven't seen her since.
The main dining room is on the ground floor of the Cherrybank Hotel, directly across the hall from where Miss Hamber's bedroom used to be. There are small things there as well that make us realize that Miss Hamber and others might still be there.
One of our regular customers used to come in about once a month, and he'd sit over there at table number 9. And he was sitting there one night, and he had his meal, and come to the end of the meal, just as he was signing his bill, he felt an icy cold hand on his shoulder, just like somebody was leaning over his shoulder watching him sign the bill. Well, he gave a great big yell, and he jumped up and looked around, and there was nobody there. And that fella hasn't really come back all that often since. Now, personally, it doesn't bother me to be working in a place that just might be haunted by spirits. But there are some staff members who get kind of creeped out about it. And They don't like being in the place when it's dark or they're alone. And there are even some staff members who have retired in a big hurry immediately after something happens to them.
One of our previous night watchmen had many experiences. The blonde-haired little girl in front of room number 4, he actually saw her, and she smiled at him and then ran down the hallway. Immediately was freaked out, but he said he decided to follow her anyway, and when she turned by room number 7, and when he got to that point, she wasn't there, she was gone. And when Jake came along, our present night watchman, and I thought, great, I finally got a night watchman that's very consistent, so I'm feeling pretty good about it until one day I come into work. Jake has had enough, he's out of here. He told the front desk person that was on that he'd had enough, he can't do this job anymore. There's just too much here freaking him out.
I am Jake Andres. I'm a night watchman at Cherrybank Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia. During the winter time, like a couple of years ago, if there's nobody in the hotel, I can hear a footstep upstairs in the hallway, and I am in the dining room, and I can hear some noise walking on the hallways, and I go upstairs. Nothing. I didn't see anything.
So I phoned him up and had him come down, and we sat down and I talked to him about what experiences he had had.
I have to check all the empty room every night. So it happens, I have to check this room 4, and I see a shadow. When I open the door, I see a shadow right away. So I had a goosebump right away, and I closed the door right away. So, because I'm scared, because I'm the only one in the hotel, nobody in the hotel, so I'm the only one. Yeah, I had an experience like a couple of 6 months ago, and I have to do all the cleaning, the vacuuming here in the lounge, in the dining room. It happens that I'm vacuuming the hallway. As soon as I finished vacuuming, I turn it off, and I went to the washroom and cleaned the washroom. So when I finish the washroom cleaning, I hear the vacuum turn it on without any people that turn it on. It turned on by itself. So I look at it, go outside and look at it in the hallways, it's on. So I turn it off. So I said to myself, don't disturb me, I'm working. Somebody's turning on the vacuum, but nobody in the hotel though, see? It's turned on by itself. I don't know who did it.
And so we have a situation where a vacuum cleaner seems to turn itself on by itself. If people believe there are ghosts about, it's very easy to attribute that to the ghost. But we wouldn't think that if suddenly our toaster stopped working or light bulb stopped working or if lights suddenly came on in the house. We look for a natural explanation. When you've got a ghost story at hand, it's all too easy for many people to say, that's the ghost, and not even investigate further, not even look to see whether the switch on the vacuum cleaner is faulty.
The bar at the Cherrybank Hotel is a pretty lively place. It's the second oldest licensed establishment in Victoria. One of the servers told a story about some unusual activity, and the rest of the staff in the hotel didn't really quite believe her.
I've been at the Cherrybank for 16 and a half years and have had several experiences. One afternoon, the phone was ringing, and I was waiting for the hostess to pick it up at the front desk, and I turned around to get the phone, and it just flew off the hook. I picked it up, and there was a dial tone. So I hung up the phone, I went down to the front desk, and I said, "Why didn't you pick up the phone?" And she said, "Well, it didn't ring." So I told a few people about this. Everybody was thinking I was a little crazy. I said, especially my boss wasn't quite sure.
There's been lots of stories told, the one with the phone in the bar. That just so happens, I truly did not believe that one until I actually saw it.
I was walking along the bar with a couple of drinks. The phone just flew off the hook. I caught it, put it back down, continued on what I was doing. It was getting to the point where it wasn't anything out of the ordinary anymore. And then I had a lot of believers. At least I had witnesses.
But it jumped off the hook, and Kathy caught it in midair as if nothing had happened. That was when I became a true believer.
Once people come to believe that a place is haunted, all these natural little things that don't have any immediately obvious explanation, but surely have a natural explanation, suddenly become the products of the ghost and appear to be solid evidence to the people who believe in the ghost.
One of the haunted rooms at the Cherrybank Hotel has become well known in town. One student team taking a film course in Victoria decided they were going to do a documentary, and they stayed in the room all evening. They listened. They also had a small tape recorder set up with a diode, hoping that they would hear the energy, hear something when they played it back. And it wasn't until they played the tape back early the next morning that they heard something. It was very faint at first, but as they listened more carefully and played it back again slowly, they realized that it was a small girl's voice.
I'm having a tea party and you're all invited. I'm having a tea party and you're all invited. I'm having a tea party and you're all invited.
And they knew right then that it was worth the wait through the evening. One gentleman was staying at the Cherrybank Hotel. He didn't know it was haunted. He woke up and he saw, hovering over his bed, the ghost of a man. And then after a few minutes, it just vanished. The Cherrybank Hotel is a very haunted place and probably has been for many, many years, at least since it's been a hotel. The restaurant, the bar, and even the bedrooms themselves are haunted with many different spirits, including Miss Hamber, who had lived there for many years, the small girl who haunts the upstairs corridor, for example. The Cherrybank is a very haunted place, and I think is going to be a place that people will come to for a long time to experience ghosts in Victoria.
An 80-year-old moose hunter named William Webster, who lives in eastern Ontario, from the early 1980s when he was hunting up in northern British Columbia. He went onto a little knoll in the forest, and some large rocks were thrown at him from the forest. He said, something's trying to kill me. But then after a little while, the creature walked out, and there it was. Long arms, long shaggy hair, walking upright like a human, but looking much more like a gorilla. He raised his rifle, had the crosshairs on it. He said, no, I can't shoot it. It hasn't really hurt me. I'm not a savage. And he just watched it go. And when I heard the story, I asked him, I said, so do you ever think about this again? He said, I think about that every day. My name is John Bindernagel. I'm a professional wildlife biologist here in British Columbia. We moved out here to the West Coast in 1975, partly so that I could start investigating these Sasquatch reports. I look at this as a wildlife subject, and I'm quite intrigued by it. There have been a number of reports of hunters seeing Sasquatches through telescopic sights or over the open sights of a rifle, raising their rifle, but not being able to pull the trigger. Hunters are not the bloodthirsty people that many people think they are. They have a conscience. They're usually want to make very, very sure about what they're shooting at. And when they see something, a Sasquatch, looking at them with these large eyes, this very human-like face, there's no way they can shoot something like that. Sometimes they say, well, I was afraid I'd be up on a charge of manslaughter. Most often it's just a case of not being able to shoot anything near that human-like.
My name's Terry Curtin, born and raised in Cumberland, BC, lived in the Comox Valley all my life. Know the hills around here like the back of my hand. And been hunting, fishing, hiking all my life around here. I've shot elk and moose and bears, cougars, the whole works. And none of them looked like this thing. And we were hunting on the back side of the low, and I had a young Kenny Berkeley with me, 14 years old at the time. So I told the young fella to just wait, and I'd go down onto the next rock bluff to look over to make sure we're on the right rock bluff to make the turn on the trail. I looked over the rock bluff, and there's a guy standing there leaning against a tree. So I hollered at him, but he didn't answer. And so as I looked at him, he didn't have any rifle or anything with him, and it looked like he had all raggy old reindeer Stanfields on. I look at it for a bit, and the hair's sticking up on the back of my head. So I turn around, and I said to the kid, I wave him down, and he gets down there, and I said, "You see what I see?" He said, "Yep." And you're trying to figure out what it is and where it fits in the scheme of things, and it just doesn't. So we look at it for a couple minutes, I don't know. And then I said, well, we better grab those deer and get out of here because it's going to be dark by the time we get to the truck. So we got back to the cab, and he went and he drew a picture on a brown paper bag, and I have a copy of it right here, what he drew later for my Christmas present. And so So I figured if the kids seen it and drew a picture of exactly the same thing I seen, there had to be something there.
So memory is really unreliable. We often think we can always trust our memories, but the thing about memory is that it can actually change after the fact. So if a person has seen something which is a little unclear, they see a figure running in the woods, it might be a fox, might be a wolf, might be a bear, then they hear stories about the Sasquatch in that region, and it's very easy for the memory to actually change, so it becomes much more Sasquatch-like. And before very long, the person now has a vivid memory of something he or she never really actually saw, but will swear to the end of his or her days that was a Sasquatch.
A few years ago, I started writing a book. I've started pulling reports together and trying to make sense of them, and I found that it actually does add up to a great ape. One of the problems is that it walks habitually on two legs, which is a very human-like characteristic. But except for that, and the human-like shape to the foot, most of the characteristics are like a great ape. One of the problems I have with my wildlife biologist colleagues is that they insist that people are misidentifying bears when they report a Sasquatch. And it's true that bears are the only other large hair-covered mammal in North America which occasionally stands up on 2 feet. In fact, the Sasquatch is quite a different creature. It's very, very huge, males being 7 to 8 feet tall, shoulder width being 3 to 4 feet, arms being long, massive chest, sometimes described as being as deep through as it is wide, and of course the hair covering. If this were a bear track, we would see claws out the front. In a soft substrate like wet sand or mud, claws always show. They're non-retractable in bears, and they don't have the big heel. This is very much the human primate sort of situation, the large heel. Bears have a tapering heel. The track would end about here. There would not be long toes like this. There would be round pads for a bear. It's really quite a different track. And the other thing with bears is that they alternate forefoot, hindfoot, and the forefoot is quite different from the hindfoot, where the Sasquatch, being bipedal or walking on 2 feet, is hindfoot, 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 just like we humans. It's always our feet, never our hands in the trackway. As a biologist, I'm always looking for reports of food habits, what the animal has been seen eating or what food items it's been seen carrying. And we now have about 40 items of about 20 of vegetation and 20 of meat, from shellfish right through to deer. There's a report from Vancouver Island that I find really interesting because it involves Sasquatch food habits. And it occurred about 20 years ago on the east coast of Vancouver Island when 2 girls were on the beach on a Saturday morning and heard a slapping sound on the water from around the point. When they came around there, they found themselves face to face with this 7-foot-tall, human-shaped creature covered with long, silky, reddish-brown hair, with a stick in one hand and holding ducks in the other. And it looked at them, and they looked at it. What's interesting is that one of the girls became a professional artist. So when I was tracking down the story and talked to her, she volunteered to do an eyewitness drawing for me. We don't really know how the stick relates to the Sasquatch catching the ducks. We have a number of reports of Sasquatches brandishing a stick. And that interests me, because chimpanzees do that. And of course, we humans do that a great deal. And we have the Sasquatch somehow catching those ducks. We really don't know how that happened. It's very curious. There are some reports from clam diggers up the BC coast here that intrigue me very much, because some of the evidence they're reporting sounds very much like Sasquatch activity. Very loud calls in the night, very strong smell on the clam beach, good tracks photographed on the clam beach. One report in particular interests me, and it was on a small island off the north end of Vancouver Island, where a group of clam diggers had pulled their skiff up onto a beach, were walking up the beach. One of them saw a face over a stump, which he described as a gorilla-like face, but said nothing. And then the rocks started coming, and the chunks of driftwood started coming. And the clam diggers left very, very quickly. In their words, they think they set a record for getting a skiff dragged off a dry beach and back in the water. But it was very interesting, one talking later about a rock just missing his head, and just the vividness of their encounter apparently with the Sasquatch. There's a variety of vocalizations described for the Sasquatch, and usually it's something that cannot be attributed to any known mammal like wolves or elk, or a bird like loons or owls. And as one of my colleagues once said, Sasquatches give themselves away by the sheer volume of their vocalization. As someone once heard one and said, whatever it was, it had the lungs of a horse. Occasionally there's reports from logging crews of loud calls and tracks, and one that comes to mind is from Lochborough Inlet up the BC coast, where tracks were found around the machinery, huge human-shaped tracks around the machinery, and then these loud wailing calls coming from the valley walls for most of the day, and loggers arriving at the beach at night, very wide-eyed from just hearing this so long.
One of the things we have to worry about when we think about things like Sasquatch and so forth is that we have a story, a very interesting story, without any compelling physical evidence. And that's the same sort of thing that we have with flying saucers and so on. The question always is, where's the evidence? Scientists would be delighted to find a Sasquatch or a Loch Ness monster or whatever. All they ask for is reasonable evidence. What they always get is very, very questionable evidence, and the biggest part of the argument for these creatures or these UFOs or whatever is eyewitness testimony. We know eyewitness testimony is very unreliable because people can perceive things that just aren't there, and that's just a part of a way our human perception works.
But the point about these tracks is that they really are physical evidence. They really do indicate that something physical and heavy passed over the land. And if this were in the shape of a bear track, we would then, on the basis of this, record the presence of a bear. And I suggest that these are not, we have enough of these now that we can record the presence of Sasquatches based on tracks like this. Another form of physical evidence that's been described is nests, which people describe as not just vegetation piled up and matted, such as a bear does for a daybed, but actually a rim of vegetation around the outside, branches overarching on the top, something that's really been constructed, because it's another form of actual physical evidence. I guess my goal in studying the Sasquatch and talking about the Sasquatch and writing about the Sasquatch is to raise its validity out of the monster category into the subject of mainstream zoology, wildlife biology, and have it included alongside grizzly bears, moose, deer, and other large mammals of Canada.
The Maritimes experience strange things, like lights in the sky at night. In fact, large groups of people have actually witnessed these mysterious lights that fly in the night sky. Don Ledger is quite a qualified individual when it comes to the study of UFOs.
Investigated a wide range of UFO phenomena in and about the Maritimes. We often have orange balls that are sighted coming in off the water, coming in over the land, and then the more generalized UFO of it being a silver disc shape. An incident that was passed along to me by one of the news anchors at one of the local TV stations. Two young girls, 14 years of age, were walking down from their house, and it was at night, and while they were walking down the road, they noticed a brilliantly lit cluster of lights in the sky just off to the side of the road to their left. Immediately, both girls knew that this was something unusual. One of them immediately became quite agitated and, matter of fact, fearful, while the other one was fascinated. And it started to move in a little closer to their position. The girl who was agitated grabbed her cousin and said, "Come on, let's go back to the house," and wanted to run back to the house, and she started to cry. She was that upset about it. Well, the other one was just sort of rooted to the spot. And eventually she was able to get her cousin to move, and they started running back to the house. They ran excitedly into the house. The girl who lived there told her father that there was this thing in the sky, and he ran outside. By that time it had curved around behind the trees and disappeared.
Halifax is not only a hotbed of activity for UFOs, it's also a place where people report alien abductions. One abduction case involved a couple that had gone to the Maritimes for a vacation. In fact, the man had grown up in the Maritimes. But when they reached their motel, they saw a strange object in the sky. It was a disc-shaped object, clearly visible and moving very quickly. The wife found this very interesting, but the husband found himself shaking involuntarily, terrified by what he had seen. She calmed him down, but something was clearly bothering him. Later that night, the wife went to bed, but the husband found himself unable to sleep. He sat looking out through the window and was shocked to see a strange hovering light outside the window. He found himself staring at the object. His last memory of the night was being almost hypnotized by the light. He woke up in the morning confused. He had no recollection of getting in bed, but he was. He had even changed clothes. He had no recollection of the 6 hours that proceeded. Nightmares began to plague him, always involving the lights in the sky and some strange dark creatures hovering over him. Instances of missing time had also occurred in his childhood. He admitted to his wife that he had seen a UFO as a child, and that the same nightmares of being marched off by some strange creatures had plagued him even then. He truly believes that something has been following him, and that these abductions may be an ongoing part of his life. It would seem that these alien creatures had waited for his homecoming to revisit him.
I started to delve more deeply into the abduction phenomena because it does seem to be part and parcel, run hand in hand with UFO phenomena, and because I was getting calls about it. The Shirley case, what I call the Shirley case, I believe that this was part of the abduction phenomenon. There is missing time involved. There was fears for her unborn baby. This quite often happens, particularly if a woman is pregnant. There are certain similarities in these cases, abduction cases, where usually there's some kind of contact made in the persons, and usually it happens in the bedroom. What happens is the person seems to either float out of their bed or float through a wall. They actually go through a wall and into a craft of some description, and then after that they're the next thing they know, they're laying on a gurney or some kind of a metal bed in the object, and they're being examined. There's many abductees out there now that hate this phenomenon. They hate what's happening to them. They can't seem to get clear of it. They find out it's been going on. Normally they don't find out until they're in their 30s that this has been going on since they were 4 and 5 years old.
What's really important here is there's no physical evidence. What you have is a story. There are books out talking about abductions. There are television programs coming from the United States talking about abductions. If one reads one of these stories, then one knows what to expect. And all you need, again, is a very suggestible person and some disturbance in the night. The person wakes up and believes he or she is now, like the person in the book, just returned from a flying saucer and had some operation performed. But there's no stitching, there's no sign of anything. Why is that? Well, of course, you can always create an explanation. These people are so advanced, they don't need to stitch you up after the operations. The whole story is so illogical, but people aren't swayed by the lack of logic. They say, well, that's the way it is. The more people are criticized about the lack of evidence, the more solid they'll become in their defense of the experience they report. At any rate, if one looks at the logic of it, one would wonder why, if people were advanced enough to come all this way to our planet, first of all, why they'd bother with us if we're so unadvanced. Secondly, why they would bother picking up people and then returning them. And thirdly, how it is that they're so magical that they can escape all detection and not leave the slightest bit of physical evidence. So once again, it's like ghost stories. Good doses of imagination, suggestibility, and no physical evidence ever.
It's pretty hard to blow this off and just call it lights in the sky. We'd really like to see as science really get involved in this and have a look at it. And let's try and find out what's going on here.
There is definitely something happening in the Maritimes. There have been hundreds of accounts. People citing UFOs, abductions. We're not sure what all this means, but we cannot deny the fact that something is happening in that area of this country. In 1832, the British built Fort Henry, a defensive outpost situated on Lake Ontario in Kingston. The conditions were deplorable. Soldiers were often flogged and rationed, and for that reason, spirits linger to this day.
Now, Fort Henry is also known as one of the most haunted buildings in Kingston. It has various inhabitants, spooks of all shapes and sizes, from poltergeists to revolutionaries who are trying to cause mischief up to this day.
One spirit seems to dominate in death just as he did in life. Niels von Schultz was a European officer who made his services available in America. He was the leader of a rebellion in which American rebels invaded Canada. They were defeated at the Battle of the Windmill. Von Schultz was captured after the furious battle, brought to Fort Henry on charges of treason, and imprisoned in the guards room. Von Schultz was respected by his captors, but it was impossible to ignore the gravity of his crimes. The British made an example of him in order to deter other rebellions. Von Schultz was hanged at Fort Henry.
And he is definitely the best candidate that anyone has come across who is still haunting Fort Henry to this day. It may also have been Von Schultz that various individuals here at the fort have seen in one of the officers' guard rooms. There has been the figure of a man seated at a table and then again leaning in the window. And it very well may be that Von Schultz is still reminding people of his presence.
The officers' quarters have been the scene of many strange events, possibly related to Von Schultz. A guard heard noises in the courtyard one night, so he followed the sounds to the officers' quarters. Upon entering, he was not greeted by an intruder, but rather a strange and unearthly blue light floating in the air, at one point almost taking on a human form. He was shocked and ran off to report this to his superiors. He was not the first person to report such an incident.
Now, up on the ramparts, some of the members of the guard here at Fort Henry have experienced a sighting. They have looked out over the wall and seen a structure standing on the hill. When they question anyone else about what this structure is, they are inevitably met with blank looks. And when they go to point out where the structure is over the wall, they find that it has vanished. Now, little did they know that a structure identical to this stood just on the hill outside of Fort Henry in 1838. And it was the gallows used to hang Niels von Schultz. There was, in fact, a photograph that was taken of this shadowy figure in the window. It's very definitely the figure of a human being, and it could very well be Niels von Schultz. Men were punished when the fort was garrisoned, punished by walking long hours under the hot sun in the parade square. They were forced to march as punishment for various offenses, especially for public drunkenness. Now, it could very well be that this wandering ghost here at Fort Henry was one of those men who succumbed to the hot sun. And considering how dehydrated that these men would already be, it's not really all that surprising that they would faint or even drop dead. Another room here at Fort Henry that's generally believed to be haunted is the bakery. And it's haunted by not only an ordinary spirit, but by a poltergeist. Now, a poltergeist is a spirit that tends to be very cruel, but very playful at the same time, constantly moving things around and breaking things. Now, poltergeists are generally tied to the energies of a young girl. And this would make sense because the bakery is one of the very few rooms in Fort Henry where children would have been allowed. On one occasion, there was a baker who was making bread early in the morning. And she left the room for only a moment. When she heard a terrific crash come from inside. Now, she went running back in only to discover that the pans contained in one of the shelves on the wall were flung clear across the room and had crashed against the opposite wall and were now lying in a heap on the floor. And it's also been discovered that the poltergeist likes to play games with the doors. It will occasionally slam the doors and open them again when anyone is inside the bakery, and it will even hold the doors shut when anyone is trying to get in. There was a guard and he was trying to get into the bakery, and he managed to open the door by only a couple of inches when it stopped, as if it were caught on something. Now he pushed with all of his might, and he couldn't get the door open. He began throwing his whole weight against the door, trying to dislodge whatever was on the other side. And finally, in sheer frustration, he shouted,
"I gotta get in there."
At which point, the door swung open on its own, and he was able to continue into the bakery. Now, this has happened on more than one occasion. Guides from the Haunted Walk have been known to have the door blocked. It's become something of a supernatural jest to say to the door, "I have to get in there." At which point the door always swings open on its own, allowing whoever is outside in.
That could be embedded like a recording into the walls. So perhaps somebody who is psychic or intuitive or open or empathetic could come in and act as a receiver. Be that as it may, there's a lot of young teenagers who work there. And that's a great time to have scary stories. And I bet there are some older people that pass on these stories. So these, it's nice to be young and impressionable, and, all these scary movies that are out for teenagers embellish and exaggerate and add on to the stories that are there. But there may be an element of something there, of the paranormal.
Fort Henry. It must have been a terrible place to serve. Even today, people hear noises and see things in the shadows. Unexplained events have occurred within the fort walls.
Being sensitive to ghosts, I've always been around the paranormal, and they seem to be attracted to me. I don't know why. And I can take pictures anywhere and pretty well tell or feel if a ghost is there.
Patrick Cross is a paranormal investigator. He has the ability and the insight to capture spirits on film.
We're at Emma's back porch in Burlington, Ontario. I'm Patrick Cross, and I am a ghost researcher, paranormal researcher. And with me is back here is Carolyn and Jim, who's both paranormal researchers. We're checking out the ghost energy down here. And this is where the main activity is, where we think and found the ghost of Emma and her family.
In 1919, George and Emma Byrons opened a restaurant entitled the Estanime in Burlington. The family lived up on the second floor. Eventually, one child would apparently drown at the back of the restaurant in the lake. When George, her husband, died of a heart attack in the kitchen, Emma carried on up until 1952, and that's where she died. After her death, Emma returned to her place, her dream. And actually, in fact, it would seem that the whole family still resides on the second floor of the Estanime.
Emma Byrons, even though she is passed on, she still is has been seen by many people here who believe she is the ghost still running the restaurant, and she very much believes that she is still in charge with her family, as if the restaurant is running from the time period that she was living. She is known to appear, and including the faces of the children have appeared running around. You've heard them laughing and doing all the kinds of things a family would do in an atmosphere that they're still alive.
We're here at the front stairway, the grand entranceway, and as you can tell by the electromagnetic frequency monitor, it's going a little crazy right now. We're picking up a lot of ghost energy.
This is going off the meter. It's electromagnetic EMF detector. There's a lot of energy present. There's no electrical at all other than the stairs itself, which is showing a lot of electromagnetic field energy of a ghost. These stairs are the original stairs going up to the Stamina restaurant for the dining, and Emma would be known to stand at the top and make her grand entrance for people coming down.
So it's a very active building, but again, it's a story about attachment and love. And for Emma, that's still her home. There is a mirror located on the second floor of the building, and people report that they pass by the mirror and see the image of another person looking at them. And you know, most people don't realize that that was part of the apartment living area of the Byron family. They resided right there. There are numerous accounts of activity in the basement area. People sense, they feel an entity down there, but they have seen the child down in the basement area. When you go down there yourself, you can sense something, that's for sure.
When people are in a building that they believe to be haunted, they've heard stories of hauntings, even if they don't necessarily see something themselves, it's very easy for them to feel a sense of presence. There's a very strong psychological phenomenon. It can be produced very easily. It's very similar to the sense of being stared at. Lots of people believe that if they're in a library or something, they can tell if someone's staring at their back. They'll have that sense of something being strange around them. And they'll turn around, and of course, as they turn around, whoever happens to be behind, out of the corner of his or her eye, they'll see that person turn, and of course they will look at them, seeming to confirm the fact that you're being stared at.
So what I'm sensing here is there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of sadness, there's fear too, there's a lot of protection. I also noticed the spirit of Robert, Emma's son. I also sensed Emma's presence. I know that this is the place where the wake was, and in the basement she kept the wine casks.
My specialty would be senses, feelings around me, ghost entities, paranormal activities. Down here, I felt a strange feeling, death, and curiosity.
The children ghosts that are down here seem to be moving around in a circle or playing around. They move around. And the reason I say they're children, they're playful ghosts, because you can hear them laughing on tape. The interesting thing is that Robert is here because his mother is here, and his sister is here. His sister is Sarah, and she died. One of the little girls died on the rocks when she was playing outside, so she died. But she doesn't want to leave because her brother is Robert, and they want to stay together. So they're happy playing here, and Robert likes playing with the handkerchiefs on the table upstairs while her mother goes around checking out the dishes that are made daily here. They're drawn here by the emotion of the place. They grew up here, they lived here, and they died here. And this is their home. And until I guess their mother says so, they're not going to leave. And 75% of ghost experiences are made up. People think of ghosts, they see it on TV, and there, wow, there's a ghost. So it's, you know, the 25% is what is unexplainable, and that's what we try to investigate. There are things that do move. There are things I can't explain, I have seen. Usually we can find a solid explanation. The 25% again of the explanation that you can't find is the intriguing part.
Emma's back porch has an owner who lingers on after death. Emma Byrnes, her husband George, and family still remain in this restaurant that was once theirs. To them, they are the overseers of this establishment and will remain there for whoever knows how long.